Soul.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. So, with the career you've had, I mean, it's definitely ambitious and challenging. Are there any stories that you've come across or messages you've curated that you think, man, I wish my younger self would have read this, or I wish I would have shared that with my younger self?
There is a story just like that. And this might not sound totally chicken soupy because it has to do with getting rid of people, but but actually I think this is a really important story. And I wrote a personal memoir in 2016 called Simply Happy, and it's basically a crash course in what I've learned from Chicken Soup for the Soul and from my life in general. And so this is a story that I have had so many women come back to me and talk about. They've said, I read your Simply Happy book and I'm implementing this strategy. Thank you so much. I didn't know I could do this. So here's the story. This woman, Georgia, she had cancer and she had friends driving her to chemo, and every treatment, a different friend would drive her to chemo. And one time a friend drove her to chemo, a supposed friend, and all the woman did the whole time was talk about everybody she knew who had cancer, who had a bad outcome. And it was the first time that Georgia got really sick after chemo. And she realized that life is like a garden, and you have to basically pull the weeds in order to let the flowers flourish. And so she realized that she had to pull the weeds from her life because people who brought negativity or toxic behavior or thoughts into her life were like weeds.
Yeah.
And so she dropped that supposed friend from her life and she started cleaning up her life. You can't do it with relatives, of course.
Right? Stuck with those.
You're stuck with them. You love them and you're stuck with them. But you can do it with friends. And I was in my early 50s when I read that story.
Yeah.
It was such an eye-opener because I, like most women, had friends who were very needy, who were sapping my emotional energy, where I would say, I have to go and see so-and-so. And then I realized, wait, you don't have to do that. You have only so much time to live, and you can surround yourself with people who add value to your life, and then you can spend more time on things that you care about and people you care about, like your family and your friends who do bring joy into your lives, and your pets and your garden and everything else that makes life wonderful for you. So that's a story that had a big impact on me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is, even the weeding reference works well for our garden listeners.
I know, but it really makes sense to everybody, right? Even if you're not a gardener, you totally understand that the weeds get in the way of the sun nurturing the rest of your garden.
Yeah, I think that's great, and definitely something that that your time on Earth is limited, and making the most of it and putting a positive energy into stuff, and whether you're overcoming a challenge yourself or you're just trying to do something positive, whether it's a personal goal or an achievement within your own garden or achievement at work, whatever it may be. In order to accomplish that and push yourself through that, you need to be around those positive people and feed yourself with that positivity, or read a Chicken Soup for the Soul book.
Yeah, and I don't think it's really selfish. I think it's really just the right thing to do, and it will be so good for the people in your life, your family, and your true friends.
Yeah. Great. So this spring, it's been a big spring for you guys where you've had 2 books that have released recently that are both pet-focused. Can you share those titles with us and a little bit of, maybe what inspired the creation?
Yeah, so we are so into pets at Chicken Soup for the Soul. We're just crazed about pets. We really are. We all have dogs or cats in our families, mostly rescues, and we're really passionate about dogs and cats. And we're a very socially conscious company, and we donate a lot to various causes. Our biggest cause always has been dogs and cats. Mm-hmm. And so we put out new books about dogs and cats every year and a half or so. And the last 4 pairs of dog and cat books have supported American Humane, which you might have known by their previous name, American Humane Society.
Yep.
But it's the largest, it's the oldest animal welfare organization in the country, and they provide a lot of support to pets during natural disasters. They'll go in, they have these big trucks. They have guys who used to work in the military, and they go in like a military team, and they rescue dogs and cats when there are hurricanes, wildfires, flooding, any kind of natural disaster. They'll go in and save people's pets, and then they'll shelter them until their families can come and get them, or if their families can't ever come back and get them, then they will rehome them in a very nice way. And they also support a lot of regular shelters and rescue organizations. And so we support them with our books, and we also use our books to accomplish a little goal of our own, which is to make people always think first about going to a shelter when they want to add a dog or cat to their lives. We want them to think shelter first, also reputable breeder.
Yep.
But we don't want them to ever go to a place where dogs and cats are perhaps sourced from a disreputable breeder.
Sure, yeah.
So we emphasize that in our books, and we even emphasize black cats and black dogs, senior dogs and senior cats, pit bulls and pit bull mixes, because we know those are the categories that are more often left behind in shelters.
Right, and it's a real challenge for the rescues.
Yeah, and so we need to clear those through, and then other dogs and cats can come in to take their place. But the worst thing is to have a dog or a cat so-called euthanized, which sounds a lot nicer than it really is.
Yeah.
So we want people to walk away after reading our dog and cat books, having had a wonderful time reading them, but also subconsciously thinking shelter the next time they want to add to their family.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, it's no lie, because when I walked into the office here, the first bookshelf I saw was the Dog and Cat Chicken Soup for the Soul bookshelf. So I thought that's fantastic. So what are the 2 books that came out this spring?
So these have been amazing. In fact, we had the biggest start with these new dog and cat books that we have ever had with any dog or cat book. So one is called Chicken Soup for the Soul, Life Lessons from the Dog, and the other one is Life Lessons from the Cat. And the stories are fabulous. And we had thousands of stories submitted, and we had to narrow it down to just 101 in each book. So you can imagine it's the cream of the crop with such variety to the stories.
So of the thousands you've had, how do you select like just these 101 stories?
It's hard. It's almost like being a college admissions officer where, you're leaving a lot of good ones out because you just can't take everybody.
Yep.
So the way it works is people go to our website, chickensoup.com, and they click on Submit Your Story. And then we walk them through the whole process. We give them writing guidelines, and we show them all the different titles we're working on. And then there's a form that they fill out. And then there's a little tiny box that will actually accept their story that they wrote in Word, and they're just copy and paste it into this magic box.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Santa's bag, with the shrinking powder or whatever. Like, it will fit. So anyway, they submit the story, and then we have a whole team of editors that reads the stories, and they all know what we're looking for. These are seasoned Chicken Soup for the Soul editors. They narrow it down to a few hundred, and then I'm finally given the few hundred semifinalists to read, and then I have to make that tough choice of the 101 that are going to go in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's picking already from like a group where they're all great.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do it, and then I feel bad for the ones I don't take, but the people we do pick are so thrilled, and they'll always get articles written about them in the local press. Like, we had some Connecticut writers in both of those books.
Really?
Yeah, we did. Some in your area. And, but it's a big deal because you're selected to be in the 101 out of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 stories that were submitted.
That's fantastic. So can you share with us, why are all of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books all 101 stories?
That was something that they had started back in 1993. They thought 100 was a round number, but then they somehow thought, well, we'll give you one extra to just propel you forward. I don't know. It's just what they did. I mean, my life would be a lot easier if they had picked a different magic number like 75, So my life would be a lot easier, but it's 101, and I really wanted to honor the legacy of the brand when we took it over, when it was already 15 years old. And so I kept going with the 101. So it's a nice thick book,
Yeah.
It's a good read. It will take you a long time to read 101 stories.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, once you get into a few, you just keep going.
They're like potato chips, aren't they?
Oh, my God. You need one more.
I know.
Yeah.
But you know what's good is that because it's in 101 bites,
Yeah.
if you're a super busy person, you can read one, put it down, leave it on your night table, or in the bathroom or wherever you do your reading. Sometimes if I want my husband to read one of my books, I leave it in the bathroom. What can I say? So anyway, yeah, but at least it's 101 bite-sized stories. And each story has its own story arc. Like, they're really standalone stories.
They are.
Yeah.
So, from these 2 books that just came out, were there any that connected with you personally?
So there was one that almost made me cry. And when I talked about this story on the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast, my producer said, Amy, you just made me cry back at the, he was like, I was in the studio and he was out with the equipment and he was out there crying while I was telling the story and trying not to cry while I told the story. And it was about this dog. It was so cool because it was by this woman named Elizabeth DeLisi. And she had this beagle who was just so faithful and so trusting. And so Elizabeth said that when she was young, the family would always go on these long road trips, like across the country to visit family in the summer.
Yeah.
And they always took this beagle, which was a rescue. And there's just something about rescues, like they are so grateful to you and you just feel so much sympathy, right, for them. And
right.
Like you don't know what they went through before you got them. And they like you are their life, and really they become your life too. And so they had this wonderful, sweet rescue beagle, and the beagle was so good. Like when they would stop, for everybody to go to the bathroom at a rest stop as they drove across the country,
yep.
They'd all run into the bathroom. They'd let the beagle out. He would go do his thing, jump back in the car. And one day they stopped somewhere, and it was pouring rain. So everybody dashed to the bathroom, dashed back to the car. They, took off in the rain. The beagle hadn't jumped back into the car, but they didn't recognize that until about 4 hours later because the beagle was so good and so quiet, and then they realized they didn't have the beagle. And there were no cell phones. So the first thing they had to do was they were in the middle of nowhere. There were no pay phones. They had to find a way to call information, figure out the gas station where they had stopped, find out if the beagle was there. They couldn't find out. So they just turned around and drove 4 hours back to where they had to go find the gas station again.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth and her sister were crying in the car, like they were so upset. And so they got back to the gas station. It's still pouring rain. It's pitch black. The gas station is closed. There is nobody there. And what do they see through the dark and the rain but 2 eyes in their headlights? And that beagle was sitting right where they had left him, in the rain, sopping wet, water pouring off his beagle ears, and just looking at them like, I knew you would come back. And they just couldn't believe that the beagle had done that, and they felt so terrible. But he just sat there trusting his people would come back. And they talked to this lady at a campsite that was adjacent to the gas station, and she said she had tried to get the beagle and bring it inside, do something for it, but the beagle would not move. He waited right where they had left him. And they felt so bad. And they wrapped him up in a sweater, and they, fed him steak that night. And he had no idea how all these good things were happening to him.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was just a great story about the incredible faith that a dog has in its humans. And it really makes you feel very responsible for your dog.
Yeah, because they're so connected to you and so reliable upon you, but yet they're so committed and loyal beyond probably what we'd experience any other point in our life.
Yeah, and we always feel like we rescued them, but they always do so much more for us than we do for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there was this other story that I talked about on the podcast, and I actually shared 20 different stories from our new dog book on the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast.
Yep.
There was another story that made me think about the benefits of dogs and what they bring to our lives.
Yeah.
And, they really make people healthier and, more fit and happier because they make people exercise. And so we had a story from this woman named Winter Presapio, and she didn't like walking. I mean, her husband was a runner, but she didn't even walk. She just I don't know. She just thought cars were what you used to move around. I don't personally get that because I love to walk and I love to walk